good? Okay. Well, then we'll turn it over to you, Adam.
Awesome. Welcome, everybody. My name is Adam Cook. I'm a 3L here at George Washington Law, and this panel is going to give us an opportunity to talk about experience-based ideas for using writing assignments as a tool for enhancing student learning, encouraging original and inspired animal law scholarship, and ensuring fair and efficient grading. A couple of housekeeping things, just to make things easy. Stay muted unless you'd like to ask a question, and you can just raise your hand function, or if that doesn't work, you can try raising your physical hand, and I will invite you to ask your question. There will be some time left at the end, 5 to 10 minutes for Q&A, and note that this is already being recorded and it will be posted to the GW Animal Law YouTube channel. So a little bit about who's going to be talking today. Um, uh, I guess a little bit about me as well. I am from Utah originally. I came from Utah Valley University. And currently I'm involved in the SalDiff chapter as the treasurer, and I do a lot of editing work amongst other things. Our first panelist is Rebecca Cary, and she's a managing attorney for the Animal Protection Law section of the Humane Society, where she's worked since 2010. And her practice includes farm animal welfare and constitutional defense issues. She's been the lead attorney on multiple challenges to state farm animal confinement and sales initiatives, including NPPC v. Ross, in case the Supreme Court upheld California's Proposition 12 against the pork industry challenge. She's a 2009 graduate of Northeastern University School of Law and a 2005 graduate of the University of California, San Diego, where she's a founder of a student animal welfare group. She's taught animal law courses at George Mason and George Washington School of Law. She's the co-chair of the District of Columbia's Bar's Animal Law section. Rebecca lives in Maryland with 2 rescue cats. Our second panelist is Professor Amanda Elyse. She teaches legal writing and lawyering skills, movement lawyering, and animal law courses at Seattle University School of Law. Her scholarship and other projects center around providing a critical lens on animal law issues, with particular attention to intersections with other social justice issues and the government and corporate repression of advocacy for animals, informed by her background in the grassroots animal protection movement. Her experience in the animal protection movement spans grassroots, nonprofit, and academic spaces, as well as spans issues that include animal testing, factory farming, habitat protection, fur farming, and dog and cat rescue. And lastly, we have Conley Wouters, is an assistant professor of law at the University of Illinois Chicago School of Law, where he teaches animal law, lawyering skills, and contracts. His scholarship has been published or is forthcoming in journals including Animal Law, the Animal Law and Natural Resource Law Review, and the Northeastern University Law Review. A former commercial litigator, he maintains an active animal law pro bono practice and was an inaugural recipient of the Compassionate Counsel Award for the Animal Legal Defense Fund. Conley holds a JD from Cornell Law School and is currently pursuing an animal law LLM from the Center of Animal Law Studies at Lewis and Clark Law School. So we will turn over briefly. I guess I also have a note that on defining writing assignments, since that's kind of the focus of this particular webinar, just wanted to establish that what we're talking about is something really broad. We don't mean just specifically a writing assessment that you might typically see in upper law school classes, for instance. But this is any formative or summative assessment that requires students to engage in scholarly or skills-based writing. So with that, want to jump into the panel discussion. And I think this will mostly just be a kind of question and answer as to whoever would like to take it up. So panelists, do it at your own will. But we'll start with what are some of the learning objectives that can be achieved by using writing assignments in animal law courses?
Thanks. I can jump in to start. So, first, I'll just start by sharing that whether it's in the more elective classes I teach or in my core legal writing and skills classes, something that I always encourage my students to do is approach every assignment thinking about who's the audience, what's the purpose, and what are the conventions associated with this type of writing. And so we start with that lens, whether it's a brief or a letter to the editor, whatever it may be. And so with animal law classes, it gives students another chance to work on that, but with different lenses than maybe they've gotten in their more like their core classes, their legal writing classes, or their doctrinal classes. And so I find that it's a really great chance to help students see how those core ideas around writing and engaging in effective writing and persuasive writing can be applied in different ways. And also sometimes students who've maybe struggled more in a legal writing class find a way to, like, just this different perspective helps them to really excel sometimes in their writing, and then that can translate back to their other classes as well. So it can still include those core writing ideas we think of in law school from that different lens that students can be often very excited about.
I'll just add, because I have a few thoughts, but I think some of them might be more relevant to topics we're going to discuss later. So specifically thinking about, and I'm glad you started with that, Amanda, by the way, because I do the exact same thing, those three components. Like at this point in the semester, my poor legal writing students are so tired of me saying that, along with a few other things, but I think they are like foundational, right? I'm not going to let myself go off on a tangent about that. So I wanted to say something about the scholarship side and seminar papers, because I know we're going to talk a lot about like helping students develop practical writing skills in the context of animal law. I think that the seminar papers could do a couple things here. Like the first thing, obviously, they can help students get into analysis of a legal issue, right, that we don't have time to cover in class. But one thing that I don't, at least in a 2-credit survey course, I don't spend a ton of time on, well, I spend very little time on relatively to the law, is like ethics, philosophy, animal rights, animal welfare, all of that stuff. And I find that seminar papers, students tend to like often use those as a vehicle to explore those issues, more deeply in ways that matter to them. So that's something that can be really helpful, specific course goal of that material, which you don't have a lot of time for in the classroom.
Right. What are some ways to fit these writing exercises into the broader goals of the courses that you guys teach?
Well, I'll just jump in to say that, I think my answer to the former question is similar to my answer to this one as well, which is just that part of my objective in teaching and in using writing assignments in the teaching is to get students excited about some aspect of animal law and to see that they can, that there are relevant parts of animal law to almost anything that they might actually be practicing after law school. So I think, I don't know if it fully answers your question, but the sort of using a writing assignment as a hook for general excitement and engaging students in a topic that they maybe haven't thought about and engaging in that topic in a deeper way is one thing that I really like about it.
I mean, I'll just say, and I hope this isn't too like abstract, but I've taught legal writing many more times than I've taught animal law, and so it's helped me understand how I really think like writing, or more broadly communication, is like the foundational lawyering skill, right? And there's a whole bunch of stuff that falls under that umbrella, like storytelling. I was just talking about being able to craft an effective, persuasive story with some colleagues today. So if I'm trying to show students how people or how animal advocates have used the law to advance the interests of animals, or vice versa, right? How the law often serves as a barrier to advancing those issues. Like, that's just a theme that keeps coming up and up again in all of the stuff we do, as we all know. And I think like having them develop these communication skills while they're encountering those sorts of issues repeatedly can often like drive home those points, A, more effectively, but also B, like it adds some variety, right? Because sometimes I feel like even as an animal law scholar and like sometime practitioner, I'm just tired of it. I'm tired of seeing the same thing over and over again in the case law, right? Even in like very diverse, whatever sort of laws you're dealing with or nominal issues, at bottom, it seems to me, we often run into the same challenges. So I think using like active practical exercises and developing those skill sets allows us to think about those issues in creative ways.
To add to that focus on the practical, I'm always thinking about practical given being lawyering skills professor and having an activist background. And so for me, it's very important that the writing component be a way to give the students very tangible skills that they can envision using. And so that can be the more traditional writing assignments. And as Conley was saying, just that the importance of being able to communicate as lawyers, but also complementary skills like having my students learn to write press releases and letters to the editor and op-eds or materials for legislative representatives, because I want them to think towards not just being able to do something in a courtroom, but also what are all those like other skills that are really helpful when you're thinking about advocating for a cause.
I guess building off of that, there are lots of ways of getting at these goals that have kind of been expressed throughout a bunch of those answers. So where do you think writing assignments are particularly good at teaching certain things versus other types of assignments? What are the qualities that are especially helpful?
Well, maybe this is obvious, but I'll kind of flip that and say that for me, I can think of something that like a writing assignment may not necessarily work well for, and that's particularly dense material, right? For example, standing doctrine. I'm sure you could think of a writing assignment that could be effective there, but that's something that would lend itself to me more of like where I have to really sort of do a deep dive lecture/discussion thing. So yeah, I'm sure we could come up with, I'll leave it to Amanda and Becca for what is actually better for writing.
Yeah, I mean, I guess where it fits well is for things that you don't care if the student is sort of memorizing, a specific sort of set of facts that you want sort of, in sort of, I don't know, multiple choice style test kind of thing, assignments where you want students to, for a subject matter where you want them to maybe do a little independent thinking on, combining their own independent thinking with existing scholarship. Yeah.
I think also like areas of the law which, for better or worse, at least I think for better as teachers, we have a lot of these in animal law that are uncertain or unsettled, or like we've been, lawyers have been working on them for a very long time, where there's circuit splits, right? Those are, provided the students feel comfortable with the doctrine and the law and all of that stuff, like, I don't know, even like different, ag-gag decisions at the district or appellate levels, comparing them and sort of having students do some sort of written analysis or even a practical exercise there is an opportunity for them.
Great. And this is a good uh, a question that just came in on the chat on what we were just talking about, so we can thread it in here. On the goal of independent thinking in particular, how do you think that writing assignments need to be changed, or maybe ways that they are still effective as they are, given the fact that, so many students are using generative AI?
Yeah, this is something that came up for me very recently in a class where I suspected that someone had used AI for their paper and had a long sort of discussion with my co-instructor on how to deal with that, which I know we could have like a whole separate seminar on. But yeah, I guess I would say I don't know how writing assignments necessarily need to be changed given AI, and it probably bears some thought, but I think that there definitely needs to be sort of checks built into any writing assignments you give to ensure that AI is not being used. And I think the question here is right, that you probably don't always know. And maybe you have to, maybe there's a little bit of an element of faith, if the school has a no AI policy and you've made very clear to your students that there's a no AI policy. I don't know. I think from my perspective, writing assignments are the value of writing assignments perhaps outweighs the occasional potential that a student is going to kind of abuse tools in their favor there.
I've been dealing with this in my legal writing classes right now as they've been turning in their briefs. And my school does not have a policy against AI because it's hard to know whether they've used it or not. And how are we supposed to do that level of inspection of every paper and stuff? But I can say I'm definitely seeing the impact of it overall on student work, and not just the final product, but their level of engaging in critical thinking and their willingness to do so. So I've used it as an opportunity to talk a lot with my students about how, regardless of how you came to the final product, if you're signing it, ultimately, like thinking about as a lawyer, if you're signing something, putting your name on it, you are responsible for what's in there. So even if you've used AI, you need to have the awareness to go back and really check it. And also trying to, as much as I can, insert the point that they need to learn the basics first so that they can even understand what AI has given them. And I've seen the chat a bit as I've been talking about things to do with like things like scaffolded assignments. So like doing component by component with assignment. And I are building in the skills that we're asking them to do. I also use a lot of group discussion in my classes so that they do have to actually be able to talk about the things because they're not able to have AI talk for them in class. But I think it's just going to be kind of an evolving discussion in education. It's the hottest topic right now.
Right. Oh, sorry, Rebecca, go ahead.
Oh, I was just
Okay.
going to say, I see in the chat that somebody had said something about the sort of personal investment, first person narrative, which I take to mean, and I could be wrong here, but having a writing assignment includes some sort of personal element in it, or something, sort of a story that's personal to the student. And it's interesting. I hadn't thought of doing that as sort of a built-in check, but it is one of the things in the assignment that I was just mentioning that did give me pause as to whether AI maybe wasn't used, because there was a very personal, heartfelt story about a person's dead cat, and I thought AI could do this, but it seems like quite a length to go.
Can I just add quickly? So first of all, I feel completely ill-equipped and it's just like too much. And I think I think Kathy or someone said in the chat, like schools and institutions are going to need to devote more resources to like explaining to students how they can effectively use this. In the meantime, just one thing I do is like try to remind students that intellectual honesty and like doing all of the work and making sure it's your original work, like that's an ethical obligation that you have as a lawyer to your client, right? Or if you're trying, I think it's an ethical obligation to animals if you're trying to help animals as a lawyer. So I think just sort of stressing that and like asking them, why are you, like a client could go type their legal question into ChatGPT, right? They hired you. I don't know, maybe I'm naive, but the last thing relatedly is that like Amanda, I've run into this in my legal writing classes. I didn't run into it the one time I taught animal law, and hopefully I won't the next time. And I wonder, I have hypothesized if it's because like students, when they have more flexibility or freedom or autonomy, maybe they have like more responsibility. They take on more responsibility as well. I don't know.
And when obviously AI isn't the entire subject matter that we're discussing here, but feel free to turn back to any of those as we go forward. Kind of concretely, it might be helpful to know how many writing assignments you all tend to assign, and maybe that varies by class, and that would be helpful to specify.
I just have one paper sort of culminating at the end of class, but and I know this bites into another question that's upcoming, but have some sort of check-ins along the way with some process built in around that.
Go ahead, Amanda.
Yeah, I'd say it varies depending on like how many weeks long the class is, how many credits. I try to make sure that, especially if they're taking something as an elective, that it's not going to be overly burdensome to them. But I'm structuring the animal law class I have coming up to be one smaller writing assignment and then one bigger one, and then I think a reflection paper with that. A
So
2-credit class.
yeah, mine's also a 2-credit class, and I was just looking back at my syllabus to remember this. I only had 2 graded writing assignments. Actually, I only had 3 graded assignments, I think. A quiz and then statutory drafting exercise, which is very, very like narrow and targeted, so it's not a lot of work. And then a seminar paper. That said, we do a lot of different writing exercises in and outside of class that are not graded that go toward participation.
So kind of moving to a different side of the discussion. So what are the sorts of things that go into the development of the writing assignments themselves? So looking at maybe seminar papers first, as Rebecca was mentioning, what are kind of the key technical or practical features that you rely on to make the assignment work?
Yeah, I can start. Yeah, so I do have students submit a topic in about the third or so week of class. And then they do an outline, both of which I give some substantial feedback on. And, you know, the amount of feedback on the outline depends often on how substantial the outline is that someone gives me. And then I don't have them do, you know, I don't look at a draft paper. So I just do the look at the final after that. But I also want to say that one thing that started doing is having students talk about their paper at the end of class in the final class, which I think is a nice way to sort of get other people interested in what they're looking at and not have this paper just sort of totally be in a vacuum.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Amanda.
Oh, I really like the idea of sharing at the end of class. I also do things like that along the way with having them do, you know, like mini check-in, like small group conversations along the way to talk about what they're working on.
I do that as well, and I also really like it. I don't. What Becca was describing sounds similar to what I do, but maybe I scaffold it even less. Like paper topics, I'll give them feedback on, but I don't do like individual feedback on any of the other steps, like outline draft. I would really like to, but quite honestly, like I have too many students in my other classes and I just don't have, and I don't have a TA to handle the administrative. So like I wasn't able to. That said, it worked out pretty well. I do try to like make time in class to just talk about topics, right? Like timely stuff, and doing like all the news items I found really helps students like brainstorm and stuff.
Kind of building off the comment that Kathy just submitted too, what are maybe some of the advantages, disadvantages of choosing particular writing formats for the writing assignments that you assign? For instance, if you do require law review formatting, then you can encourage, of course, the submission of the work product afterwards. But of course, if it's more of a litigation focused for some reason class or environment, then of course the blue pages formatting might be more helpful. So do you have any thoughts on that, anyone?
I do the same thing with encouraging them to publish. And the main reason I do that is because I want everything we do in class to have some sort of practical application to their career or at other points in their education. And I also remember being a law student and taking these seminars and almost everyone treating the seminar paper as like completely unimportant, right? And like doing it at the last minute. I don't want that to happen. So I think really emphasizing like the potential here, particularly right with the papers that are really, really well done and very strong. I really encourage the students to do something more with that after class ends and make myself available to help them do that. Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Nope, go ahead. It was not interesting. Carry on.
I knew there wasn't too much to say on that subject. So, on the topics that students go through, this is obviously a huge part of the assignment. And what have kind of been some tips and tricks on helping students to not only just pick a topic, but actually pick one that they are interested in and willing to work hard on, and that might be publishable, and those sorts of concerns?
When possible, like timing permitting, I like to be able to have individualized conversations with students, help them develop their topic, and help, especially if they don't have a more obvious interest in animal law, to help them talk through how that connects to other things they do care about. Because as much as possible, you want to have buy-in, both for the animal issues you're discussing as well as for the class, so that it can be a productive space with that.
Yeah, I totally agree. And to that point, am I allowed, can I share my screen, Adam? Because I think it'll be,
You should be able to.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this is what I do. Again, trying to balance like, other teaching responsibility. Okay, you can see that. So I just give them like a list to start with, but make very clear that this is like, well, it says, I just noticed it says, here's a small sample. It's not that small, but I make very clear that they're in no way limited to these topics. There's a lot they could do with these topics. And then, like Amanda said, like, I think the difficulty, not just for students, but at least for me, like writing scholarship, is narrowing down the thing that you're interested in, right, into something that is original and makes a contribution and has a clear thesis or argument, et cetera, et cetera. So I have found that students, like, some of them hew closer to the stuff we've covered in class. Sometimes they're like, is it okay if I do this thing that was mentioned in a footnote or something that we didn't cover, but I'm really interested in, which is great. But I think like completely understandably, it's really important to guide them through sort of like, okay, you have the topic, you might even have something like a thesis, but like you have to develop that further and at least have a good sense of what the narrower argument is before you start outlining and stuff. Oh, and then I think very, very simple, just tell them where to go, right? For like really preliminary research, because most students are going to know what the Brooks Digest or like our library has a animal law guide. So I think stuff like that can be pretty helpful.
Yeah, I would echo what's been said about sort of talking one-on-one with students about sort of what their interests are and trying to help them sort of spin out, either from your own law practice or, interesting articles you've read recently or whatnot, related things that are related to that topic. If students just sort of know they want to do something marine mammal related generally, but, don't really kind of know where to go from there to narrow it down. I also think it can be helpful structuring your syllabus to sort of do, which I think probably a lot of them are like this already, doing a lot of sort of survey of some of the general topics of animal law kind of up front, so that before students choose a topic, so that perhaps they can sort of have a flavor of some of the primary issues in farm animal law, wildlife law, et cetera, before they choose that topic.
Can I just ask a follow-up about that, Becca? Sorry. What
Sure.
is, when you say that survey at the beginning, I mean, that makes a lot of sense, but like, what does that look like? So early on, you're just like giving them like a couple key highlights of the major areas and topics that you're going to cover in the course, or
It doesn't always work out perfectly like that, but we have sometimes we play around with sort of the ordering of things, but if possible, I like to get some of those major weeks up front, that we sort of have one class. Well, we have sort of one class about wildlife, one class about farm, one class about companion animals, and it's not a perfect system because there's also some others that pop up. There's a whole class related to standing and constitutional limitations and things like that. But I find that like some of those classes that are sort of type of animal specific are where students tend to get some of their ideas for paper topics.
thank you.
And I do take Jennifer's point to be helpful as well. One of the things that Dean Hessler did when I took the Animal Foundations class was talk about how there's a connection to any kind of legal thing you might be interested in. There are always animals to be found there. So on the it seems like most of you are assigning a very small number of writing assignments. But in the cases where you're assigning more than one writing assignment, are they always iterative? And as kind of a side question to this, and I think the answer would be yes from what you described, but when you are assigning any writing assignment, do you always include draft requirements?
Just say reality of capacity. A lot of times teaching multiple classes and stuff is very limited what I can do with steps along the way for these sorts of classes. And so I usually try to structure things where what I want them to get out of it can largely be through. The only thing I look at is the final.
Yeah, I mean, I would say because of the practical limitations we're talking about, I put a lot of thought and effort into like the ungraded stuff, and that's where a lot of the writing happens, and a lot of like what I feel like, and it seems like students feel like as well, like you get to experiment with fun practical stuff. Like Amanda mentioned, a press release, right? That's great because you can easily connect it to animal law and show a ton of examples and think about how does it work, like what skills do you need, like how does it connect to other things that the lawyer is doing that we might be more familiar with, but also just generally like I think it's usually safe to say they're not going to write a press release in any other class unless maybe they're taking like media law or something, or I don't know what it would be. I never thought about lawyers writing that when I was in law school, and so I think it's really nice to teach a class that is on the one hand like a doctrinal class where we're doing case law and substantive law and all that stuff, but again, be able to like be creative about how we're applying that knowledge in the classroom. So these are often short assignments, obviously. Sometimes they happen in class, sometimes they happen, I ask them to do something before class, and then there's another component, discussion or like short presentations. But I think the key is like being creative, and that doesn't always work, but when it does, I think it adds something valuable to students' experience.
Kind of following up on that, in to the degree that you do use more informal or frequent smaller writing assignments that maybe are directed towards more reflection or a smaller skills-based development, how many of those do you actually end up assigning? Is this like a every class sort of thing, or what's been effective in kind of structuring how to schedule those?
I generally don't do more than like a few total that they would have to spend time on, like outside of class and stuff, doing writing assignments, because just have to keep in mind that they are so overwhelmed with coursework, that as much as like we want to get into these classes, we can't have it be unbalanced with everything else they're doing. I never want them to feel like they like just with, I guess, with all the pressures, I would rather have fewer and them actually care to do a good job than to get the complaint I hear sometimes from students where they just feel like they're in a fire hose and not learning anything. So yeah, I'd say quality over quantity.
And like another way, I think of the same thing. And a way I try to manage that is if I do have them, like Amanda, I only do a couple things that require them to do, like an assignment outside of class. But when I do that, I'm always gonna like be really, really conscious of what I'm having them read for that week, and I'll always like reduce the reading load to try to make up for it. I think the other thing is like it has to be, so I don't want them to just write something and then turn it in, and because it's not graded, it's like, oh, you get participation credit, right? Like it has to be something that we follow up on, and it usually has like some sort of component in class to allow us to do that.
Maybe to draw a comparison between these informal or smaller assignments, or maybe ungraded, compared to the larger seminar culmination assignments, what learning outcomes are best fostered by each of those tools?
I think the smaller ones, I mean, so first of all, I would say like you could probably fulfill any learning objective you want through either one, right? Some might be easier than others, some might lend themselves. But for me, the smaller ones, like I tend to emphasize things like client communication. So I didn't do this, but I'm thinking about doing it next semester because I just wrote a very short, like, pretty straightforward opinion letter for a client. And like, I think I'll have the students do that. Maybe they work together on it. Maybe they do it like in class, but as long as you keep it like pretty narrowly tailored so that, with what Amanda said in mind, that it doesn't overwhelm them. Those are really good opportunities, I think, to emphasize like client communication and stuff beyond just like applying the law to the facts, right? Meaning like just in the context of discussion or I don't know, some sort of quiz, ungraded quiz. So that's what I use those for.
Great. So the other big thing we wanted to touch on was evaluation, which of course is the key stressor of many students. And there are obviously lots of different ways to evaluate. whether you're using rubrics or just comments or conferences or maybe oral feedback, group feedback, individual feedback, just to kind of lay out the landscape of possible conversation points. So which sorts of evaluation frameworks do you gravitate toward and why?
Across my classes, I think that as far as like assessment to help them continue to improve their work, a conference with me is what I've seen to have the most impact on, them making connections, light bulbs going off. I feel like they tend to come away from conferences with new understanding and direction. For grading, I I've not I'm not a fan of rubrics. I know there's a variety of opinions on that, but personally, I struggle with using rubrics because writing can be so individualized that when I've tried using rubrics, I end up feeling like it's not accounting for things in the way that I want and that it doesn't actually end up accurately reflecting like a letter grade. So I tend to do a like summary comment and then comments throughout, the number of comments throughout depending on capacity, if I'm asking them to revise, just kind of what my purpose is. But I'm a fan of doing like a summarizing comment on written work.
Yeah, I don't use a rubric either. And as I mentioned, I do really like using sort of this process of having students submit topics followed by an outline and having sort of substantive feedback at both of those points, which may or may not include a conference with the student or just sort of a email back and forth. I always make clear that they can set up a time to meet with me if they'd like to. And I think that that ends up really helping with the grading, because when you've got that much sort of back and forth with a student, a lot of my sort of checks on the paper ends up being about sort of, how well did they respond to my feedback? Are all of the elements that they said they were going to have in this paper there? Is there anything that feels like it's missing? If there's anything that feels like it's missing, is it something that I told them should be in there previously? Or is it just, something that would just be a nice little extra add-on? Sort of assess accordingly. I tend to team teach with people as well. And so I think that having another evaluator can be a really good check on sort of some of your own, any internal biases or, inconsistencies with, I don't know, maybe you just don't like somebody because they giggled in class the whole time. And you want to make sure that that's not coming out in how you're grading their paper, stuff like that.
Okay, so I'm feeling very vulnerable here as apparently the only rubric user, but I'll try to justify this position. So first of all, in terms of what I do use a rubric for final papers. I also give end comments and comments along the way. I've learned over the years in legal writing courses, I've become much better about like being more sparing and targeted in my comments throughout, not line editing. Okay, that makes me feel a lot better. Some pretty good people on my rubric corner there. So I use rubrics because so it might be because I teach contracts, which is a curved class, and you 100% need a rubric there, right? For like issue spotter exams, because I often, still trying to break the line editing habit. Or at least, moderate it. In contracts, I'll once in a while have a student come to me who's very upset with their grade. It was anonymously graded, and they say, why did I get this grade, right? And then I can show them the rubric and say like, okay, let's apply this to your essay. And luckily, that's always really been a useful tool, and the student does seem to see where it's coming from. That was not an issue in my animal law class, but I think it does. That's one big reason I use it. But it also does help me focus a little bit in focus in my assessment. I do recognize the flip side of it that Amanda was talking about. which is like I don't want to be boxed in by it either, right? Like I want to be a bit flexible. And then the last thing I'll say about the bias that Becca mentioned, that's a real thing, obviously. And in some classes, we try to mitigate that by anonymizing the grading. Grading is not anonymous, so I'm just like very, very honest with my students. If this ever comes up, I don't raise it affirmatively, but like there's plenty of research out there that like all sorts of assessments are biased, and I'm going to do my best to be open and transparent and communicative about this process. And like I encourage you, like Becca was saying, to come talk to me about your project. So yeah, those are my thoughts.
On that point, it certainly seems like the literature indicates that no one can escape their biases, and maybe objectivity is impossible. But to Amanda's point and Conley's point in particular from those last comments, there seem to be ways in which using a rubric can pull us away from objectivity and fairness. And then there also seem to be ways in which a rubric can help us get to objectivity and fairness. So what are kind of your thoughts on either side of that, or of its strengths and weaknesses?
I think none of my animal law students like said this or were really like, where's the rubric? Where's the rubric? But I have found in other classes that like students appreciate me setting my expectations for the assignment is, right? And that's why the rubric is there too. I am clear to these point, like this isn't completely exhaustive. There's no way I can capture everything. There's no way I can like mathematically, scientifically apply it, but I'm going to do my best, right? And at least you have this thing that we're both referring to as a sort of a baseline.
Even with not using a rubric, I still do things like having, the list of expectations written out. There's other ways of showing them, like in writing, something they can reference what I'm going to be looking at. So just to be clear, like not having a rubric doesn't mean they don't see something like that of what I'm going to be assessing. I just don't then have something where I check boxes on a rubric when I'm actually doing my grading.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was just thinking that, Amanda, that, effectively in the syllabus, I've got set out, certain requirements, like I'm sure we all do, a length of paper, that it needs to be blue booked, whatever else. And yeah, maybe that's not as extensive as a rubric would be. It's not exactly a checklist, but it is, they're going to get downgraded if they don't meet those features.
What you both said just reminded me that I had a colleague at another school in legal writing who like did use a rubric but didn't call it that, and I can't remember what she called it, but it was like it was clear that like that's how it was being used and applied. But I think it was smart to sort of be sensitive to how you're like talking about it and thinking about it, because that can potentially alleviate some of the issues we're talking about.
Great. And we'll just take a couple of minutes to turn to putting yourselves into your students' shoes. And maybe this can be gleaned from actual feedback that students have given you. But what out of writing assignments do you understand to be the most valuable subjectively to your students?
I get a lot of positive feedback on things like press releases, because they see it as a practical skill that they're not getting elsewhere in law school. So I think that's very valuable to be able to provide them with things like that.
I can't remember, Adam, if in your question you used the word like practical value or just value, but I'm gonna say something either way that maybe is not the most practical, but is really important to me. I try to, in this class and all the classes I teach, especially animal law, though, it's really important to me that students are able to find their own voice, their own passions, right? Again, like we were talking about, that not all of them, many of them are not going to be animal lawyers, but if they can, and I try to emphasize things and do certain, use certain methodologies to help them get there, But if they can use all this stuff as a vehicle to not only develop their skills, but figure out like one thing about where they want to go or what's important to them professionally or personally or how those intersect, that's the most important thing to me.
Yeah, and bridging on that, and also sort of back to one of the previous questions, yeah, I think that students seem to really value being able to dive deeply into an animal law issue of their choosing. And we keep, in the classes I've done, paper topics extremely broad, right? It just needs to be really anything in animal law, and it can be from whatever position too. And so, you know, those positions are not always going to be my own. And I make really clear at the beginning of the class that, you know, I come to this from a certain perspective. I'm an animal rights practicing attorney. But that it's okay if they want to write a paper. And I recently had a student do that, like sort of for use by the cattle industry, but incorporating some ideas from, you know, from the class, in a way that, you know, he thought could be useful for the cattle industry. And it was one of the best papers. So I think that students value getting sort of choice in topics and getting to dive deeply in something, but also getting to do that from whatever perspective sort of calls to them.
And the last question from me is just how do you account for the diversity that you see amongst students in really anything that we've talked about in assigning and evaluating and designing writing assignments?
I may have said something like this, but I think I really am trying to be clear that I want them to take ownership over their work and have autonomy while also balancing like what my role is and what my obligations are as a teacher. And I think that somewhat gets at this issue, right? So I'm not just assigning them like the same memo problem as my other students, and I'm trying to be really explicit that that comes with a lot of opportunities and also responsibilities. But I hope it can get them. I hope it can serve whatever their needs are.
Awesome. Then I will turn it over to the audience. If you have a question, feel free to just raise your hand or type it in the chat if you don't have the ability to give us your voice. Yes, Delcy, sorry if I mispronounced your name.
No, you pronounced it correctly. And I'm sorry, I'm a Teams guy, so I can't remember how to raise my hand here. Thank you all for this. It was really, really helpful. One thing I struggle with, and Matthew Liebman really made me think about this more, is that animal law classes are not writing classes, and we should be assessing students on what we're actually teaching them. But also they need to be good writers to be good lawyers. And so I go back and forth about how much I should be assessing them based on their writing. I think the same would go for research too. I used to do like my animal law survey class, it was a research paper. So I was grading them on their research and their writing. And I've moved away from that and at least made it smaller parts of the course to assess them on what we actually spend time talking about and reading. But I'm just curious how you guys navigate that.
Well, not to flip it back on you, Delcy, but I'm curious what other tools you've moved toward using instead of the writing assignments.
I do a midterm, a final, but they're less weight, which I think is good. These are not research papers, but I do short writing opportunities, which I stole from Kristen Stilt, which are sort of reading reflections, and they do 5 over the course of the semester. So they pick the days when they want to do them, and those help inform our conversations. It helps me get the quieter ones talking. And I do get to give them a little bit of feedback on their writing, but it's more focused on, are they critically engaging with the material? Yeah, those are the main ones.
Yeah, I mean, I think that sounds great. It is something I think about, that as much as I like the research paper, and I really truly do, and I like engaging with the students about what they're writing, it does mean that we, for some of the students, especially who are not as, motivated to be an animal attorney after they graduate, I feel like sometimes that means a lot of eyes glaze over during days when we're talking about things that have nothing to do with their paper. So for me, I think it's a question of meaningful engagement from the students, and so I could see the possibility of tweaking how I do assessments based on some of that.
I think something too with this to take into consideration, is it like a general animal law survey course, or is it something more specialized? Like I mentioned, and the animal law class I have coming up is called Animal Law and Advocacy. So they're going to be putting together materials for legislative representatives. So I feel like that matters to me too, is how the class is framed and then what type of writing assignment may or may not go with that.
Yeah, and I do have more skills focused animal law classes where I'm much more comfortable with that because we're talking about legislative drafting in class and all these other skills. I'm talking more about the sort of doctrinal animal law survey class.
I will just add that this question made me think about like my own background and potential, like, I don't know what you would call them, methodological biases. Like, I taught legal writing, I taught undergraduate writing. I love writing. That's what I love about being a lawyer, right? And so maybe like part of it too is like, I mean, yes, the most important thing I think is what you all are suggesting, which is it's important to have this balance, and we do need to assess students on this. But like, if anyone is in my position or similar, I think it's also important as an educator to just like, grow, develop, and grow our skill sets as well. So, like learning how to write a really good animal law exam is going to help your students learn better, right?
Thanks, everybody.
Maybe
Yeah, sorry.
jump in to say that one of the other things I have to remind myself all the time is I can't teach my students everything I want them to know. And I'm not the only one in the building, right? So hopefully part of what I'm doing is iterative and supporting what's already been done and sort of reaffirming, right, lessons they've already learned in maybe different ways so they'll hear it differently and like actually sort of begin to grab onto it. And once they start using the skills, right, in a different way, that's a time when they begin to own them to some degree. But I can't teach them everything I want them to know, and they're not where I want them to be when they come into my classes, right? So they don't have all the skills that I'd like them to have. And I have to try to keep reminding myself that, especially when I'm doing line editing, that sometimes less is more, right? That when I give them as much feedback as I feel like I should, they're overwhelmed and they can't take it in. So I do try to remind myself to pick a lane, right? So what is it that I can offer that maybe they haven't had, or that I think is super important that they've already had, but they need to hear it again, or, whatever that is. And that tends to vary based on obviously the course, but also the writing exercise, right? So I do op-eds, and so that's a very in a reading group, that's a very different kind of conversation about writing than obviously clinic writing, than obviously papers in a typical sort of seminar kind of class. But I'm just sharing it because I have to remind myself all the time. So I'm saying it out loud because I haven't reminded myself of it recently this semester, and I'll share it with you guys.
We can all take it on as a good affirmation, I think. Take the opportunity to just say thank you, everyone, for joining us. And thank you especially to Conley, Rebecca, and Amanda for a wonderful discussion. Note that, of course, this is a recurring series. So please come back and know that you're always welcome to ask for specific topics or to add, if you'd like to be a panelist, you're welcome to volunteer and et cetera in any other way that you'd like to be involved. I actually don't have it in front of me. Kathy, would you be able to tell us what the next webinar will be about?
Yeah, so this is our last one for this semester. And so we'll have 3 more in the spring semester. So our first one will be in January, mid-January. We'll be posting that on LinkedIn and also on our webpage. And the recordings of all the past ones, including this one, will be up on our YouTube channel. So I think it's January 14th might be our next one. I'll double check.
All right.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks
Okay.
again.
Thanks all.
Thanks.
Thank you.